Hi everyone! So today we're doing this project discussion a bit differently because instead of me being here with one of our biologists, I'm joined by our project lead Gus from Reforesting Scotland. Hi Gus!
Hello, how you doing?
And before I forget, if you are watching this in the account, feel free to add any feedback or comment or anything. We really appreciate it and we will try to reply to everything. So that's important. Anyway, so maybe you guys could start with explaining what this project is about a bit and yeah, like just why we're doing this.
Yeah, so the project is called the Mountain Birch Project. It's kind of does what it says on the tin. It's about birches that grow really high up in the hills. So I'm based in Scotland, so this is a project in Scotland, obviously in the Highlands. So mountain birch trees are, in Scotland we typically have Caledonian Scots pine woodland, which is this amazing ancient habitat where these pines have been here since they colonised after the last ice age. Typically we should go from Caledonian Scots pine wood into mountain birch woodland on the hill, and then this phases into this sort of montane scrub habitat with willows and juniper and dwarf birch. But in Scotland there's quite a lot of focus has been placed on Caledonian Scots pine woodland for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades even. People have been really passionate about it. Maybe the last 2 or 3 decades people have been looking at this montane scrub with these rare sort of Arctic alpine willows. But for some reason people just haven't realised that we're missing this mountain birch woodland. I basically was in touch with a friend in Norway who works in Norway, and he said, you know, somebody should really sort of take this forward and try and get some mountain birch woodland restoration happening in Scotland, because it's not as it's a bit niche. There's not many people thinking about it, and there's very few people doing it. So I basically thought, well, that's something I'd absolutely love to do. I love woodland and I love mountains and I love Scotland, so why wouldn't I get involved? So yeah, it's really about trying to fill that little niche where a lot of restoration schemes are not managing to, not even thinking about or knowing to think about this mountain birch woodland. And a lot of these schemes now are doing this through doing their sort of restoration work through natural regeneration. So, you know, bringing deer numbers down. I'll go into detail about that in a bit. Or putting up fences and allowing trees to naturally regenerate. But we're finding that in Scotland we have so little montane woodland, or woodland even above 400 metres, that I think, I'm trying to remember, I think there's 5.2% of Scotland is covered in native woodland, and of that 5.2%, only 4% of that is above 400 metres, and mountain birch woodland should really be between sort of about 600 and 800 metres, and yes, we really have like none. Practically it's functionally extinct as a habitat. So these schemes, even if they do reduce their deer numbers, there's no seed source for these mountain birch woodlands to re-establish. And it's the same for these montane willows, but people have realised that and started growing montane willows and planting them out in suitable sites. So basically doing the same kind of thing as what they've done with the willows, as we go out there, find these tiny little relics of high altitude birches, collect seed and then send them to a tree nursery who will grow them on, and then we can get them out into various restoration schemes who are basically looking for it, just to sort of help kickstart the process, especially in places where they are actually going to have a chance to grow. So yeah, going back, as I was mentioning, deer numbers, all of this woodland has probably been lost centuries ago. It's been a gradual decline over hundreds of years. So it's difficult to say exactly what truly, you know, got rid of it all. Currently at the moment it is high deer numbers, and their browsing pressure means that these trees can't regenerate, and so they're either restricted to crags if they can find a crag, or they're just gone. But in the past it could have been a whole number of things. It could have been clearance for agriculture. Even at these high altitudes it would be clearing it for livestock. Although actually in Norway these mountain birch woodlands are really important for livestock because they provide shelter where it's higher up, so these livestock aren't sort of really cold. But at some point in history we must have tipped the balance where there was too many livestock in the hills, or too many deer, so these trees never regenerated and eventually just died and never grew back. So yeah, we're starting from a very, very low point. So far, from what I've done so far, there's probably, I don't know, I'd say maybe about 100 birches that are growing above 600 meters in Scotland. And these are trees I'm talking about, like ones that actually can produce seed, which is really important to the project. Quite often you'll find rowan trees or sometimes birches growing at really high altitude, but these could just be chance seeds that have blown in and aren't actually going to get anywhere. Whereas we really need to get these really hardy, high altitude adapted birches into these restoration schemes so that we can actually start reforming this really important habitat in Scotland's hills.
Yeah, okay. So how did you get involved with Mossy Earth with this?
So I think it was a friend. So I'm representing Reforesting Scotland. I should have probably said that. You might have said that already.
I mentioned
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So my friend, who's another director of Reforesting Scotland, we're a charity in Scotland. Basically, we want healthy communities in a well-forested land. So it very much fits in with our sort of ethos. He said, "Oh well," because I'd been trying to do this kind of voluntarily, you know, going out in my own time whenever I could find time, but I'm a busy person, and you know, if I had work, then I had to prioritise work, so I wasn't being able to give it the time that I really wanted to give it. So Matt said, "Oh, have you heard of Mossy Earth?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have actually heard of Mossy Earth, but I just hadn't thought, oh, maybe they'd be keen to sort of fund it." And yeah, Mossy Earth, the way that Mossy Earth works, just I felt that it would be a pretty neat fit with what you guys do and restoring all sorts of perhaps less habitats that aren't given as much attention, or species that aren't given as much attention. I thought it fitted in really well, so I got in touch, and sure enough you guys seemed pretty happy with it, so here we are.
Yeah, that's great. So we're actually going to be working with a lot of like other organizations or people involved in restoration, right? Like you said that you're going to be gathering the seeds and then giving them to, or like providing others with them, right?
Yeah, so I mean basically we just really want to get these high altitude adapted birches into places where they are going to grow, and there's a lot of there's a lot of organisations now who are doing really great work. I mean, I could list off loads of them. There's Marlodge Estate, it's National Trust for Scotland, and then just over the hills from then they've got Cairngorms Connect, which is a big landscape scale partnership. Nearby then, well further west they've got Carrara Estate, John Muir Trust have been restoring woodlands, Trees for Life, that's a big one, and Borders Forest Trust down in the southern uplands. So these are all people who have had contact with, or organisations have had contact with, and they're all pretty keen. It's just a case of getting the seed to them, and they're more than happy to start planting it out. And getting it into these restoration schemes and trying to kickstart that process of recovery of these mountain birch woodlands. And then the other part of the project, which I haven't actually mentioned yet, is well, I mean, it's great fun. Absolutely love it. Going out and collecting these birch seeds, you get into some really incredible parts of Scotland. I've seen some really cool places and some really cool species associated with these high altitude sort of mountain woodland relics. But it's quite hard work, and they're so thinly scattered. I mean, yesterday went up and collected a bunch of seed. I think this is all I've collected. So that's from 2 trees there, and it was it's big walks in, and you know you're getting not loads of seed. I mean it's a lot compared to what's out there already in tree nurseries and whatever, but it's hard work. So what we'd really like to do is once I've got these seed from all over Scotland and got them growing up as little saplings and seedlings, is giving a lot of them away to the restoration schemes and whatever, but then also taking some of these and planting them out so that they can then grow up and then cross-pollinate and increase the genetic sort of resilience of the trees. So these high altitude, whatever it is in the genetics that makes them better adapted for growing at high altitude, get that really sort of firmly planted in this like seed orchard, we'd call it. So that then those trees, once they produce seed, you know that they've got really good high altitude genetics going into that seed, and then it's easy enough for me to go up there and collect a load of seed rather than going here and then there and then there and then there.
Yeah.
Like 3 trees each time. And the other thing...
So do you have them mapped out, like where they are?
I'm currently
trees,
mapping them. Yeah. Just getting my head around how to work QGIS again. But yeah, it's really quite interesting just seeing how few there are, because I mean, when we started out the project, we weren't expecting a lot, and to be fair, we've got more than I'd expected we'd find. But still, when you actually see it on a map, it's like, I mean, yesterday's site, I think we had four mature birches, and then the other site, because we did 2 sites yesterday, the other site's maybe, I don't know, maybe 20 birches above 600 meters. But even more frustrating is that sometimes you go to a site and there's absolutely no seed, and you've walked all that way and you're like, why is there no seed? And there was one site I visited this year, no seed, and then I could look across to another site maybe 5 or 6 kilometers away, which I visited the next week, and there was loads of seed there. So it's not like you can kind of work out before getting up there. You really do just have to go up there and collect the seed. But I can't complain, you see lots of nice wildlife and all sorts of stuff. So.
Yeah. Why is it that some of them have seeds and some not?
It's just, honestly, not sure. There's some trees like aspen in Scotland, seeds really rarely. It's something like it's roughly every 17 years. It's really strange, and then things like oak have mast years, or they do really well, and poorer years, and I think they know, I don't know, but I think they know there's weather patterns or something associated with that. Birches just, it doesn't seem to have any sort of explanation, especially because I had like a site there and I could literally look across to the site where there's loads. I mean, I've got all the seed here from that other site, so yeah, not sure, but perhaps something we'll learn through the project.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like you've already started this project then.
Yeah.
Was there any, like, apart from collecting seeds, was there any like preparatory, or I don't know, like anything else that you've already done within the project? A
lot of it has just been messaging all of these various sort of restoration schemes, and also people who work in these areas saying, oh, do you know of any birches growing over however many 100 meters, and occasionally you get the response with, oh yeah, we have actually, and we hadn't really thought about it, we hadn't done much with it, which was really encouraging. But yeah, not a lot other than a lot of time spent scrolling around maps, being aerial imagery, just going in, is that a tree? Is that a tree? No, it's not a tree. And then a lot of time basically doing that.
But do they look very similar to other birches then? Like, how do you see the difference?
So it's so the way that we are viewing mountain birches in Scotland is basically, if it's a birch that's growing over 600 meters and producing seed, then we want it. We're not going too in depth into genetics and species and subspecies. especially because it's very confusing, and I'm not entirely sure. I keep having to reread these papers and going, which one is it that we have? Because in Norway, I keep mentioning Norway, because particularly southwest Norway is really comparable, sort of climatically, geologically, and ecologically with the Scottish Highlands. They've got similar rainfall, similar wind speed, same rocks, same plants, but they've just got a different land management history. So they've still got their mountain birch woodlands, whereas we don't, because of things that have happened in history. So, sorry, I've forgotten what I was going to say there, but generally, I've done quite a lot of sort of chatting with Duncan Halley, who works for, I think it's the Norwegian Nature Institute. And he's Scottish, but he's lived in Norway for I think 30 years, so he's got kind of a good picture of what happens on both sides. So he was really instrumental in trying to work out exactly what it was we needed to look for, and that's where we got the sort of, he said 650 metres would be the best cutoff, but we'd be really struggling for any trees over 650 metres. Yes, what I was trying to say about birches in Norway is that mountain birches in Norway have been found to have I'll use a big scientific word, but I will explain. It's introgressed with dwarf birch, which is like a small shrub. So somehow through history, the genetics from dwarf birch has managed to get into the sort of genetic strain of these mountain birches, and they think that's what's made mountain birch more capable of growing at high altitude. So they're bushier, they tend to be, instead of a single trunk, they sort of branch out like this, which makes them more resilient to frost and snow and all sorts of things. So they are generally a sort of bushier tree. It seems that in Scotland we've maybe lost that kind of influence from dwarf birch into our sort of high altitude birches, and that's probably just because we've got so few, and so the genetics kind of the sort of flow of genetics hasn't been able to be maintained over time. So basically what it comes down to is if we've got a birch growing at high altitude, we're really interested if it can give us seed. And then I keep banging on about birches, but mountain birch habitat, they call it the birch belt, because if you look on a hillside in Norway, especially in autumn, there's this big band of birch that goes around the hillside. So the birch belt is typified by these kind of big gnarly twisted birches, but then it's also got other species in it. Rowan is really crucial in it, aspen is really crucial species, and so is in Norway. They've got a montane form of bird cherry, which is a really nice shrub, but in Scotland I haven't been able to find a single record over 400 metres altitude. So it's potentially a species that's extinct now, or a subspecies that's extinct now in Scotland. And it's certainly not the only thing that we've probably lost with mountain birch woodland, because in Norway, like in Scotland, if you go up into the hills, the bird you hear all the time is the meadow pipit, sort of cheep, 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 cheeping away all the time. It gets a bit wearing if you're spending too much time on the hill. But in Norway, if you go into mountain birch woodland, almost as common there as meadow pipits are here is the blue throat, which, if people don't know, it kind of looks like a robin, but it's got a blue throat, funnily enough, with like a little red dot and a red outline. So that's a species that, it's breeding just over there on the continent, but we don't have it here, and you sort of think, oh, why not? And then you look and the habitat isn't there. So there's a whole load of stuff that we should be able to return to Scotland if we restore our mountain birch woodlands.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But like listening to all of this makes me think, why hasn't anyone done this before? Like, why is it such a... Is it just because there are other birches, so people don't think that there's this one type of birch that isn't really around anymore?
I think that's it. Like specific, I think that's it, spot on. Because there's quite well, they're not doing it now because of Brexit. But there used to be trips for sort of conservation practitioners in Scotland to go across to Norway, and it would be Duncan Halley who'd lead them out there, and he'd show them these montane woodlands and everything, and other things to do with, you know, predators and all sorts of stuff. But so there's plenty of people who've been across there and seen this habitat, and I don't know whether, I've not been, I'm going to go at some point, but I don't know whether these people have gone up, they've walked through the pine wood and gone, okay, we have pine wood, but they've walked through the birch woodland and gone, okay, we have birch woodland, and then seen these sort of montane willow and juniper scrub and gone, oh, we don't have this, we need to restore this, without realising that those montane birch woodlands are quite different to our sort of lowland birch woodlands, which I think is our most dominant native woodland type, is lowland birchwood, which could succeed into oak wood or pine wood, whereas mountain birch woodland is like the dominant canopy species is birch. It's not going to become pine wood or become oak wood or whatever. So yeah, I think it is just as you say, people see a birch wood and go, oh, birch wood, whereas it is something a bit more special than that. So
okay. So what about this project itself? So in addition to collecting seeds, is there anything else? Like, well, I mean, I make it sound like it's very simple, but just the project itself. What is all the actions that are planned for this?
So
project?
yeah, main one is the seed collection, but then part of that is also trying to. I mean, we're working with Elsom's. Are they Elsom's trees or Elsom's seeds? I might have to check that, you might have to add that in the post, but we're working with Elsom's anyway, who are really, you know, like top of their game in terms of a tree nursery in Scotland, so they really know what they're talking about. But mountain birch has never been grown in Scotland before, so there's all sorts of questions like, oh, is the seed going to be viable, or do we need to like grow it at high altitude, or otherwise it loses its like high altitude adaptability, or all these sorts of things. So it's been trying to answer those questions. Fortunately they do grow, and you don't have to grow them at high altitude, because I don't know how much money it would cost to set up a tree nursery at 600 metres, but yeah, so it's trying to answer a lot of questions that people have about both the habitat and then also restoring the habitat. So that's a lot of that I can do just by chatting to Duncan Halley in Norway, who's extremely helpful. Other stuff, well, there's the seed orchard obviously, which would make it a lot easier to collect the seed, but then should hopefully also give us more resilient and better adapted seed. Something we haven't quite worked out where we're going to do that, but I'm hoping that whoever it is that facilitates that, you know, whoever sort of gifts us the land almost to do that, I'm hoping they'll be happy for us to almost treat it like I'm calling it like a mountain birch garden, because I'd really like to not only plant out these birches, but also plant out the sort of the other species that are typical of this habitat, or would be typical of this habitat. So we've got lots of tall herbs like wood cranesbill and globeflower are really typical, and then we've got the other trees like, you know, if we can get hold of some montane bird cherry, I'd love to stick that in there, so that instead of people having to go all the way to Norway, which not everybody can manage to do, they can come to Scotland and go, oh right, this is the habitat that we're trying to restore to our hills. You know, chucking in those like montane willows as well, and juniper and dwarf birch, just so that people can get a feel for what Scottish mountain birch woodland would be like. That would be like a long-term vision of mine. I'd absolutely love to be able to walk through mountain birch woodland in Scotland.
Oh yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What about all the animals and birds?
Well, yeah, those ones are trickier because you kind of have to hope that they'll just return. But I mean, a lot of them we do have in Scotland. You know, siskins and red polls absolutely love the birches because they feed on them and then they can nest in the scrub. And ring ouzel is apparently quite typical of that mountain birch kind of woodland zone. Whereas in Scotland it tends to just be restricted to crags, craggy ground with sort of grassland below. So it'd be really amazing to see them move into that sort of habitat. Black grouse is another species that likes these sort of, well, they like woodland edge, but the mountain birch woodland is not, it's not like a closed canopy woodland, it's a very sort of open woodland with scattered trees and you know, and all the other important sort of habitats that we have in the Scottish Hills, like the wet heath and blanket bog and all sorts of other bits. So they love that sort of habitat. So yeah, it would be a case of hopefully once the habitat gets big enough, then these species will move in. And things like bluethroat, actually, I mean, obviously it's a bird, so it's better adapted for, you know, finding these little habitats, but they do pop up like every now and then in the Scottish Highlands, so there is a chance that they would colonise if they could find it. But it's really just a case of giving nature a chance to, you know, establish itself. But it's there's a really nice sort of metaphor is you don't just buy a goldfish and put it on the table. You need to get the fish bowl and put the gravel at the bottom and get the little air filter in and the plants and the food, and then you can put the goldfish in it. So hoping to start building that fish bowl with these mountain birches.
Yeah. So this project is basically filling a gap then in these restoration efforts.
Yeah. It's very. I think Reforesting Scotland, all the directors are quite on board with it, which is great. But it's very much Reforesting Scotland's kind of project, in that we quite like finding those things that nobody else is quite doing yet. I'm not going to say nobody else is doing it, because there are schemes out there who are thinking about this stuff, but in general there's not many, and you know, they don't all have the time to visit all these various birch trees all over Scotland to get seed. So yeah, we're basically trying to facilitate that, and yeah, fill that gap where there wasn't either a person or the time or the expertise to go out and start restoring this habitat. So yeah, Mossy Earth is helping sort of bring all those things together and actually make it happen. So yeah, definitely plugging a gap.
Yeah, that's great. So what about the risks then? Are there any risks or threats to this project itself, but also like to the habitat or the ecosystem? I don't know how to explain it.
Well, yeah, no,
like if we get these birches out there, what are the risks for them?
So even before we get the birches out there, there's a risk that, you know, I can't get enough seed to really be getting into enough of these restoration schemes. Well, yeah, that was I did think that might be a risk anyway, but I'm starting to think more and more that it's not so much of a risk, because we are getting seed, and you know, I've collected a lot more this year than I've collected the past few years, when, you know, I wasn't actually, you know, didn't have the time or, you know, to do that. So I think that risk is kind of averted, which is good. There's a risk that these trees just won't grow. So I don't think it's a very big risk, because as I say, we're collecting from trees that have managed to grow to a decent size and produce seed at high altitude. Because another driver of starting this project was that we had spoken to some people who'd tried planting birches at high altitudes in Scotland, but they'd used seed from trees at sort of 400 metres, and those trees just sat there. They just didn't grow. Whereas these trees that I'm collecting from, most of them do have some regeneration in the area that are, you know, the trees are actually putting on growth each year. So yeah, I'm hoping that's not too much of a risk. The other risk is probably deer. That's quite a big risk, but if we're targeted enough in who we give the saplings to, then you can be quite sure that they're really putting in the effort to keep on top of the deer issue or protect the saplings, or, you know, those are probably the biggest risks. There's another risk kind of associated with a lack of understanding. So in Scotland, because it's, I mean, I'm sure a lot of your members will have heard of shifting baseline syndrome. So in Scotland, because our hills have not had woodland on them for so long, like, so, you know, centuries and centuries, like there's no generations who remember trees being on the hill. We're just so used to that, and so it's quite easy for people to question whether that's the right thing to do. And so you can kind of sometimes be, it's really good intention and all this sort of stuff, but people are sort of going, oh, I'm not sure we should be doing that because this area is important for this. But it's an understanding that all of these things, kind of rubbed shoulders for centuries at some point and still do so absolutely fine in Norway. So it's trying to sort of not bridge a gap, but kind of help people, stop people from being so defensive against these trees, if that makes sense. For example, some sites I've been chatting to the managers of, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're really keen to do this, but our site is designated with, whether it's like a national or international designation, like a protected area for certain species or a certain habitat. So they're saying, yeah, we'd love to do it, but the regulator, like the government organisation for nature in Scotland, says, oh no, you can't do that because this site is designated for this habitat and it's not designated for mountain birch woodland. And my answer to that is, well, nowhere's designated for mountain birch woodland because it's extinct. So we've got to start somewhere, and often these protected areas are where these conservation organisations are working. And so it's, trying to get a sort of, just them to be a bit more lenient and understand that mountain birch woodland isn't a threat to our biodiversity. If anything, it's seeking to enhance it greatly. A lot of knowledge sharing and sort of hopefully maybe presentations and kind of just chats with people in charge who maybe have questions about this stuff. So I'll need to start.
But it is still recognized as a domestic species, right?
How do you mean?
Like it's not, no, I mean, because I'm just thinking about this thing that we've been looking into with Mossir, the muskox in Sweden. I don't know if you read about that, but that the problem is that the government doesn't recognize it as a Swedish species. So what about this mountain birch?
Yeah,
like habitat, it's recognized as Scottish.
I think it's just so niche that nobody's really, it's not recognised, and it's not said that it's not nobody's saying it's not Scottish, but nobody's saying it is because they're just not talking about it and haven't done so for so long. So it's kind of slipped under the radar for so long that it's now, people automatically kind of have questions because they're unfamiliar with it or unfamiliar with the ecology of it and the species and how it all should fit in. So yeah,
that's so sad.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one.
Yeah. Well, I can understand it also, considering that they look similar to normal birch. So I mean, it's easy to ignore it.
Yeah, I mean, a mountain birch is the same. It's the same species as downy birch, which we do get in the lowlands. In Scotland, we have silver birch, downy birch, and dwarf birch. Dwarf birch is like a little shrub. Silver birch tends to be low ground, under 400 meters and on drier soils, whereas downy birch tends to be on more upland sites and slightly wetter soils. But then this mountain birch is just it's a particular group of these downy birches that are just better adapted. So it's a different, I suppose, I understand where they're coming from because it's difficult to define it. They're going, well, why is it any different to a normal birch? But it's the habitat as a whole, and the trees themselves are kind of the structure, but you can't get the structure unless you're using these particular trees that are well adapted for it. So it's a whole kind of a big journey for everyone, myself included, in trying to understand how it all should fit in with what we do still have in Scotland. Yeah.
Okay, then one thing that I like to ask, I mean, you did go into it quite a lot already, but maybe still, just to kind of end on a good note, if everything goes well and this project is successful and we get a lot of seeds and get people to work with these seeds, in long term, what would be the best case scenario? What is the vision that you have for the Highlands in general with this?
Yeah, in general, I'd like lots of schemes all over the place to be really going for this and taking it on board and running with it pretty much. The more patches of mountain birch woodland we can get across the Highland, across the Highlands, sorry, the better, because yeah, and then once those are facilitating natural regeneration in these areas, hopefully we should see the habitat come back. And even longer term, I want to see that habitat back, and mixing in with all of our other, you know, amazing habitats we've got in Scotland. One thing I'd absolutely love to see working is in Scotland we have a globally rare habitat called northern hepatic mat, and this is a kind of plant community which is dominated by these leafy liverworts, which are like mosses but have a slightly different growth form. They kind of look like, I don't know, caterpillars or worms, and they often in Scotland they grow under sort of boulders or like tall heather. But if you go to other places where these species grow, which is often like Nepal, and Norway has a bit, and Northwest America, they're growing under basically mountain woodland. You know, in amongst, whether it's rhododendron or juniper or birch or something like that, they're growing under these trees, whereas in Scotland they're restricted to these, like, I almost feel like they've slotted into where they've found a niche in the absence of a functional habitat. So I'd love to see those two things now slotting back together in Scotland's uplands, because I think it would just be so eye-opening to people as to not only how much we've lost, but also how much we can gain from restoring habitats. And not only ecologically is there's quite a lot that, obviously there's loads ecologically that I'd like to see happening in the long term, but culturally I'd love for people to really embrace this, and not only mountain birch woodland, but perhaps it can be like a sort of flagship for people reconnecting with our forests in Scotland and really gaining something from them, because in Scotland we've lost so much in terms of our connection to I mean, I think globally everybody has kind of lost connection, but certainly in Scotland we have, you know, like there's not really a foraging culture. The hunting culture is kind of, it's very niche. There's only a certain sort of part of society who really do that, and it's not frequently, it's not very well entwined with natural healthy habitats. So I'd really love for our culture to shift to living more in harmony basically with the landscape, and if that means restoring mountain birch woodlands so that people have these wonderful woodlands to walk through whilst they're either going hill walking or, you know, I don't know, hunting or mountain biking, any of these things, I just really love people to embrace it and yeah, kind of get back a sort of cultural appreciation for our woodlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is something I definitely feel we've lost, and there's so much we could gain from mountain woodlands. Sorry, I could ramble for so long, but you know, these mountain woodlands are great for fungi and berries and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just, yeah, my imagination kind of runs wild with all the ideas and things that I don't know if they're going to happen or not, but I'll only know if they're going to happen if we start restoring this habitat. So, which I suppose comes around really nicely to say I'm just really chuffed to be able to work on this project and that Mossy Earth are facilitating that.
Yeah, I'm really happy about it also, and I do understand what you mean. I mean, I'm from Finland myself, and we have a lot of forest, and yeah, like it's very available and people appreciate it, and the way you describe like what you would like to see more is a lot what I can't imagine being without.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add about this project before we
Are
end?
you sure you want to ask that question? No. I'll I think I can round it off there. I think that gives the gist. But yeah, as you said, I think you've got the comment section, and I'm happy to answer any questions some way or other.
Yeah, so everyone please comment. And also there will be more information in the project page as usual, and the management plan will be there, so anyone who wants to learn more can not only ask in the comments but also find more information on our website at mossy.earth. So yeah, I think that's it for this time. Thank you, Gus.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, and good luck with your
Oh yeah,
seed
I'm
collection.
back out next week into the hills, so yeah, I better get the waterproofs on.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Cool. Cheerio.